Welcome to Valor and Violence. December 25th, 1683. Belgrade. A tent city sprawled along the Danube, canvas shelters, leaking cold rain onto men who no longer looked like conquerors. In the largest tent, a man sat alone on carpets that once belonged in a palace. Kara Mustafa Pasha, Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, commander of 300,000 soldiers, architect of the greatest military campaign in a generation. His hands trembled as he lifted the wine cup, not from age, from knowing. Outside, a messenger dismounted. Everyone in camp recognized the Sultan's colors. Everyone knew what such a messenger carried when he rode alone through winter without an army at his back. Not orders, not reinforcements, justice. The messenger entered without ceremony. He carried no letter, no scroll, heavy with imperial seals and flowered words. Only a length of silk, dark green like the banners that once flew from Vienna's walls. Like the pavilion Kara Mustafa abandoned when the Polish cavalry came down from the hills like the wrath of God himself. He placed the cord on the carpet between them. The two men looked at each other. The messenger's eyes held something close to pity. Kara Mustafa's held nothing at all. He dismissed the guards. Alone now, he picked up the silk. It felt impossibly light for something that carried the weight of an empire's rage, smooth against his calloused palms. The same hands that signed the order to march. The same hands that waved away his officers when they begged him to assault Vienna's walls, instead of waiting, always waiting, for surrender that never came. How does 300,000 become nothing? That question burned hotter than the wine in his throat. 4 months ago, he commanded the largest army the Ottoman Empire had assembled in half a century. Janissaries in white turbans, whose fathers conquered Hungary. Sipahi cavalry, whose grandfathers rode to the gates of Vienna itself in 1529. Tatar horsemen who learned to kill before they learned to walk. Engineers who could reduce any fortress to rubble. Miners who could collapse walls from beneath. Supply trains stretching back to Istanbul like the veins of some great beast feeding on Europe's fear. And now, scattered, broken, running, dead. The Janissaries who survived called him the Butcher of Vienna. Not because of what he did to the city, but because of what he did to them. Made them dig trenches while the defenders rained cannonballs on their backs. Made them wait week after week while disease turned the siege lines into mass graves. Made them watch the northern hills, waiting for relief that everyone said would never come. That couldn't come. That was impossible. Until it came, Kara Mustafa closed his eyes and saw it again, September 12th. Dawn breaking over the Kahlenberg Ridge like a blade drawn from its sheath. Mist lifting. And there, where there should have been nothing but forest and empty slopes, banners, thousands of them. Polish eagles, Austrian crosses, German standards. An army that intelligence said didn't exist, couldn't exist, would never unite in time. But intelligence lies when pride stops listening. He remembered the sound, not the cannons or the muskets or even the screams, the sound that came before all of that. Hooves. Thunder made of iron and horse flesh and wings that hissed like demons as they descended. 20,000 cavalry moving as one organism, one singular intent, erasing everything in their path. His janissaries, his pride, his certainty, all of it swept away like dust before a storm. The Green Pavilion. His headquarters, his throne, his monument. He'd set it in the center of the siege work so every man could see where power lived. So Vienna's defenders could watch it from their walls and understand that Kara Mustafa Pasha would not move, would not retreat, would not accept anything less than total victory, and then he ran from it. Left behind carpets from Persia, chests of gold meant for the Sultan's tribute, maps showing the road to Prague and beyond. Left them for the Polish king to find like a beggar's abandoned camp. The silence in the tent grew heavier. Outside, men moved through the camp with the careful quietness of people trying not to wake the dead. But there were no dead here, only the dying. The Ottoman Empire itself, bleeding from a wound it carved into its own throat. He'd told the Sultan he would open Europe, take Vienna, and the continent falls like a house with its cornerstone removed. Paris, Rome, the German principalities, all of it waiting behind that single city's walls. Finish what Suleiman the Magnificent started. Restore the empire to its rightful glory. Make the crescent moon fly over St. Stephen's Cathedral. Instead, this, a silken cord on a carpet in a tent that smelled of defeat and wine gone sour. Kara Mustafa stood. His knees protested but held. He was 52 years old. He'd fought Poles before and won. He'd crushed rebellions and conquered fortresses and negotiated treaties that brought kingdoms to their knees without a single sword drawn. He knew war. He understood strategy. He'd studied every siege of Vienna that came before, learned from Suleiman's failure, prepared for every contingency, except one, that he might be wrong. He wrapped the cord around his hands, testing its strength. It would hold. Of course it would hold. Ottoman craftsmanship never failed, even when Ottoman judgment did. But before the silk tightened, before the darkness came, one thought burned clear and terrible in his mind. This didn't happen in September, when the cavalry charged. This didn't happen in July, when the siege began. This happened in spring, in Istanbul, in the moment when he believed his own certainty more than he believed reality. This happened when he decided that Vienna would fall because he willed it to fall, when he mistook desire for destiny, when he forgot that cities don't surrender to inevitability. They surrender to violence or they don't surrender at all. The cord tightened, and Kara Mustafa Pasha, who commanded empires and moved armies like chess pieces across continents, died wondering how 300,000 became nothing. We will trace that question backwards. From death to decision, from silk to steel, from the end to the beginning. Because this isn't a story about how Europe was saved. This is a story about how empires commit suicide one proud decision at a time. Spring 1683, Istanbul. The imperial palace hummed with preparation. Not the chaos of war, but the precision of ceremony. Maps spread across tables in the Grand Vizier's chambers, edges weighted with daggers and wine cups. Kara Mustafa traced the route with one finger. Belgrade to Vienna. 400 miles through territories the empire had already broken. Hungary conquered. Transylvania pacified. The road clear all the way to the Habsburg heartland. His advisors stood in a half circle, watching. Some nodded. Some stayed silent. One, an old Janissary commander named Ibrahim, who'd fought at Vienna in 1529 when he was young and the world was different, cleared his throat. The relief force. Kara Mustafa didn't look up. What relief force? Poland, the German states. Austria itself. If they unite, they won't. 3 words. Flat, certain, final. Ibrahim's mouth tightened, but he said nothing more. You didn't rise to Grand Vizier by tolerating doubt, and you didn't stay alive by speaking truth to men who'd already decided what truth was. But here was the thing about intelligence. It tells you what you ask it to tell you. And Kara Mustafa asked the wrong questions. He asked, "Is Vienna's garrison strong?" Intelligence said no. 15,000 men. At most, many of them militia. Walls built for an earlier age of warfare. Bastions crumbling. Morale uncertain. The Emperor Leopold was weak, indecisive, more concerned with France than with the Ottoman frontier. This part was true, all of it true. Vienna was ripe fruit waiting to fall. He asked, "Will the Christian powers unite in time?" Intelligence said no. France actively worked against the Habsburgs. German princes distrusted Vienna. Poland's king was old, cautious, concerned with his own borders. The last time the Christian kingdoms assembled a true coalition against the empire, men who fought in that war were dust now. This part was also true. Europe was divided, had been divided for generations. But he never asked, what happens if I'm wrong? Never calculated. How long can Vienna hold? How fast can help arrive? What occurs if the siege extends past August into September when campaigning season ends and autumn rain turned siege works to mud? Never considered that old King John Sobieski of Poland might see Vienna's fall as his own kingdom's death warrant. Never imagined that fear could unite what politics could not. Intelligence is a mirror. It reflects what you bring to it. Kara Mustafa brought certainty. The mirror showed him certainty back. 400 miles north, Vienna knew what was coming. Rumors traveled faster than armies. Hungarian refugees, Tatar scouts, merchants from the east all carried the same message. The Turks are coming. The largest army in memory. The Grand Vizier himself, leading them, Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, stood on Vienna's walls and did his own calculations. Not certainty, mathematics. 15,000 defenders, 220 cannons. Walls in decent repair on the south and east, weaker to the north. Food stores for 3 months if rationed. Water from wells inside the city. Church bells that could ring to every corner, organizing defense sectors when words couldn't reach. He wrote it all down in ledgers, careful script, numbers that didn't lie. Then he calculated time. If the Ottomans arrived in July, if they began siege operations immediately, if they used miners instead of direct assault because Kara Mustafa would want the city intact, a jewel, not a ruin. If relief took 6 weeks to assemble, march, and arrive, then Vienna needed to hold for 60 days, maybe 70, 2 months, 10 weeks, 70 nights. Possible. Not probable, possible. The difference between Starhemberg and Kara Mustafa was simple. Starhemberg knew he might be wrong, planned for it, built redundancies, calculated worst cases. Kara Mustafa knew he was right, planned for triumph, built monuments, calculated only victory. In March, Emperor Leopold called a council. His voice shook when he spoke. The reports from the east were apocalyptic. 300,000 men, maybe more. Janissaries, Sipahi, Tatars, auxiliaries from every corner of the Ottoman Empire. Cannons that could reduce fortresses to rubble. Miners who could collapse walls from beneath. An army that hadn't been defeated in living memory. We should negotiate, Leopold said. Starhemberg, standing at the back of the chamber, said nothing. You didn't contradict emperors in open council, but his silence was loud enough. Leopold saw it. You disagree. Count? I disagree with nothing, Your Majesty. I merely calculate. Calculate what? That if we negotiate now, we negotiate from weakness. That Kara Mustafa will demand Hungary, Transylvania, tribute, concessions that make us vassals. That in 5 years, or 10, he'll return and demand more. That empires which surrender once keep surrendering until there's nothing left to give. Leopold's hands gripped the armrests of his throne. And if we fight? Then Vienna might fall, and Europe might fall, and we might die. Starhemberg's voice didn't change, didn't rise, stayed flat as arithmetic. Or we hold, and relief arrives, and Kara Mustafa discovers that certainty is not the same as truth. The room held its breath. Speaking to emperors this way ended careers, ended lives. But Leopold, weak, indecisive Leopold, did something unexpected. He nodded. Prepare the defenses. So Vienna prepared. Citizens hauled stone and sandbags. Militia drilled in the squares. Engineers reinforced bastions. Priests blessed cannons and led prayers that sounded more like war chants. The city understood what Kara Mustafa didn't. That belief without evidence is just hope wearing armor. That you can't will victory into existence. That war is mathematics written in blood. And 400 miles away, the Ottoman army marched. 100,000 men became 200,000 as contingents joined. 200,000 became 300,000 as auxiliaries attached themselves to power. It looked unstoppable because everyone said it was unstoppable. Because Kara Mustafa believed it was unstoppable. Because intelligence said Vienna would crumble, Europe would fragment, destiny would unfold exactly as planned. The mirror showed him armies and glory. It didn't show him time, or rain, or a Polish king who understood that Vienna's walls were Poland's walls, or 60 days of mathematics that Starhemberg counted in his ledgers while Kara Mustafa counted triumph he hadn't earned yet. By July, when Ottoman scouts first saw Vienna's spires on the horizon, the trap was already closing. Not on Vienna, on certainty itself, on the idea that wanting something badly enough makes it real. On 300,000 men marching toward a city that had 2 months to become mathematics, and a Grand Vizier who had eternity to become wrong. July 14th, 1683. The Ottoman army arrived at Vienna like a nation migrating. Not just soldiers, but an entire civilization on the move. Tents rose across the plain in geometric precision, white canvas stretching to the horizon, smoke from 10,000 cooking fires, the smell of horse and sweat and anticipation. From Vienna's walls, defenders watched the transformation. Yesterday, green fields and empty roads. Today, a city of their enemies, larger than Vienna itself, arranged in crescents and squares that spoke of order, discipline, power. Kara Mustafa's green pavilion rose in the center, enormous, visible from every angle. A declaration: here stands the man who will take Vienna. Here stands inevitability. The first cannon fired on July 17th. Not a barrage, a greeting, a message. The ball crashed into the Burgbastei, sending stone fragments into the air like deadly snow. Vienna's defenders fired back. Their cannons were older, fewer, but they fired. Calculation showed that Vienna would not surrender in silence. Then the mathematics began. Kara Mustafa had 300,000 men, but he couldn't use them all. Siege warfare is geometry, not mass. You need miners to dig, engineers to build trenches, infantry to hold ground, cavalry to patrol and prevent relief. The rest wait, eat, sicken. Die slowly from dysentery and typhus and boredom that kills as surely as musket balls. He divided his forces. 50,000 in the siege lines, 50,000 in reserve. The rest spread across Hungary to guard supply routes, watch for relief, pacify territories. Simple division. 300,000 becomes 100,000 becomes 50,000 at the actual walls. Still overwhelming. Still more than enough. Except mathematics has other variables. Underground, the real war began. Ottoman miners, men from Anatolia who learned to dig before they learned to walk, started tunneling toward Vienna's bastions. They worked in shifts, 24 hours a day, digging through clay and rock, shoring up tunnels with timber, packing gunpowder charges at the end. The goal was surgical: collapse a section of wall, pour through the breach before defenders can react, take the city with its buildings intact, its churches standing, its palaces ready for new owners. But Vienna had miners too. Starhemberg hired Saxon engineers who understood earth the way sailors understand wind. They dug countermines, listening for Ottoman digging, plotting intersection points. When the tunnels met, battles erupted in absolute darkness. Picture this. You're crawling through a tunnel 4 feet high. Dirt falling on your head. Timber creaking. Air so thin each breath tastes like suffocation. Your lamp is a single candle because open flame eats oxygen, and you need oxygen more than light. You hear digging ahead, getting closer. You freeze. They freeze. Both sides listening to each other listen. Then someone moves. Picks clash in darkness. Men fighting with knives and hands and teeth in spaces too small to swing a sword. You can't see who you're killing. Can't see who's killing you. Just hands in the dark and screaming that echoes wrong. Muffled and huge at the same time. Sometimes the tunnels collapse. Sometimes gunpowder charges detonate early. Sometimes men get buried alive in earth that becomes their grave and their gravestone, and nobody knows they're down there until the smell seeps up through cracks in the ground. This was the siege, not glory, mathematics. Each week, Kara Mustafa's officers brought him reports. Progress measured in yards, southern bastion undermined but not collapsed. Northern approach slowed by counterfire. Eastern sector flooded by defenders who broke water mains and turned trenches into canals. Casualties mounting, not from battle, from disease. Dysentery killed 20 men a day. Typhus killed 30. The math was relentless. 50,000 in siege lines minus 50 deaths per day equals 47,000 in 10 weeks. Minus wounded, minus desertions, minus men too sick to fight. His officers suggested assault. Take the walls by storm. Accept casualties, but end this quickly. Kara Mustafa refused. I will not present the Sultan with ruins, pride speaking, but pride disguised as strategy. He wanted Vienna intact, wanted to ride through the gates as conqueror, not destroyer. Wanted St. Stephen's Cathedral standing so he could convert it to a mosque himself. Wanted the credit for an elegant victory, not a brutal one. So he waited, ordered more mining, built more trenches, each day creeping closer, each day Vienna's food stocks diminishing, each day relief not arriving. The mathematics looked good. Vienna had supplies for 90 days. The siege started in mid-July. By October, they'd be starving. By November, dead. Simple arithmetic. Except Kara Mustafa never calculated his own consumption rate. 300,000 men eat staggering amounts. Supply trains from Istanbul stretched for miles. But Hungarian roads were mud. Local supplies were exhausted. Captured villages had been stripped by previous campaigns. The besiegers were starving almost as fast as the besieged. Inside Vienna, Starhemberg implemented his own mathematics. Food rationing. Every citizen got precise amounts. Calculated by age, by work, by necessity. Children received less because they needed less. Soldiers received more because they burned more. Horses were slaughtered methodically. First the old, then the injured, then those not essential for hauling cannons. The meat was distributed by lottery to prevent riots. Even the bones were boiled for marrow, then ground for meal. Water was controlled with religious precision. Wells were guarded day and night. Citizens lined up with buckets, received their allocation, no more. People who hoarded were executed publicly, not cruelty, calculation. 60 days requires exact resources. Hoarding breaks the equation, breaks Vienna. Disease came anyway. In August, typhus appeared. Started in the poorest quarters where people lived densest. Spread despite quarantine. By late August, 20 citizens died daily. By September, 30. Starhemberg added it to his calculations. Fewer mouths require less food. Cruel mathematics, true mathematics, and still Kara Mustafa waited. His janissaries began questioning openly. Not mutiny, not yet, but grumbling that turned into talking, that turned into delegations of officers approaching the Grand Vizier's pavilion. They stood outside in the heat, waiting for audience, rehearsing careful words. Excellence. The men grow restless. The men grow soft, you mean? Excellence. Winter approaches. Then we take Vienna before winter. Excellence. Intelligence reports Polish movement in the north. This made Kara Mustafa look up from his maps. How many? Estimates vary. Perhaps 20,000. 20,000. He smiled. Not warmth. Calculation. We have 300,000. Let them come. But he didn't have 300,000. He had 50,000 in fighting condition. 20,000 sick. 30,000 scattered across Hungary. The rest were numbers on paper, not swords in hands. And the Poles weren't 20,000. Intelligence was wrong again. Or rather, intelligence was telling him what he wanted to hear. Again. September arrived. Rain came with it. The siege lines turned to swamps. Trenches collapsed. Mines flooded. Men huddled in mud, trying to stay dry while disease ravaged them. And Vienna's cannons fired whenever clouds broke enough to see targets. Inside the city, defenders watched the north. Starhemberg climbed the walls every evening despite his wounded shoulder, despite exhaustion, despite everything, and stared at the Kahlenberg Ridge, looking for something, anything, a signal fire, a banner, proof that mathematics could work, that 60 days of careful calculation would equal survival. On September 10th, watchers saw lights on the ridge, not campfires, too many, too organized, an army. A massive army, moving through the Vienna woods, like a galaxy condensing from darkness. Starhemberg permitted himself something he hadn't allowed in 2 months. Hope. Not certainty. Hope. The mathematics had held. Barely. Blood-soaked and desperate. But held. In his green pavilion, Kara Mustafa received the reports and felt the world tilt. 300,000 was supposed to be unstoppable. Was supposed to make relief impossible, was supposed to mean that wanting victory badly enough made it real. Instead, the mirror finally cracked. And on the other side was just a man who'd been wrong since spring, whose certainty killed his own army more efficiently than any enemy, whose mathematics never accounted for the one variable that mattered most: time. And time had run out. September 11th, 1683. Dawn broke over the Kahlenberg Ridge and revealed what intelligence had promised could never exist. 70,000 men. Not 20,000. 70. Polished banners beside German standards, beside Austrian crosses. An alliance that politics said was impossible, that geography said couldn't assemble in time, that every calculation in Kara Mustafa's reports said would never happen. But fear is better mathematics than certainty. King John III Sobieski sat his horse at the ridge's crest and looked down at the Ottoman camp. He was 54 years old. Had fought Ottomans at Kotin, at Zaravno, knew their tactics like a man knows his own scars. He'd ridden from Warsaw with 20,000 Polish cavalry, collecting German and Austrian reinforcements like a storm gathering debris. Not because he loved Vienna, not because he loved Leopold, who'd barely helped Poland when the Ottomans raided its eastern borders, because he understood that Vienna's walls were everyone's walls, that if the city fell, the Ottoman Empire would have a clear road north and Poland would be next. Strategic calculation. Not heroism. Mathematics. He studied the terrain. The Kahlenberg Ridge descended steeply toward Vienna, a natural ramp of forest and slope that would give cavalry momentum. The Ottoman camp sprawled below, focused on Vienna's walls, trenches, and siege works oriented inward. They expected relief to approach from the west, from Linz where Leopold fled. Instead, Sobieski had marched through mountains, through the Vienna woods, approaching from the north, where terrain was worst, but surprise was complete. From Kara Mustafa's perspective, in his green pavilion, the appearance of 70,000 men represented total intelligence failure. But not sudden failure. Slow failure. Compounding failure. Each week he'd received reports. Polish army still assembling. German contingents delayed. Austrian forces scattered. All technically true. All missing the essential pattern. That scattered forces were converging. That delays meant they were coming, just not yet. That still assembling meant nearly assembled. He'd stopped asking the right questions back in Istanbul. Now questions stopped mattering. The Christian army descended at dawn on September 12th. Not a charge. A controlled advance through difficult terrain. German infantry on the left, pushing through forest, engaging Ottoman outposts. Austrian troops in the center, methodical, grinding forward. Polish cavalry held in reserve on the right. Sobieski waiting, watching, calculating the moment. The Ottomans rallied. Janissaries in white turbans formed ranks, their discipline legendary even in chaos. They'd fought at Belgrade, at Buda, at fortresses across Hungary. They knew war. They counterattacked the German advance, pushing back, holding ground. For hours, the battle sprawled across the hills in a stalemate of smoke and blood and inconclusive violence. Inside Vienna, defenders heard the cannons but couldn't see the battle, just sound rolling across the plain like distant thunder. Starhemberg ordered every church bell rung, not celebration, signal, telling Sobieski, "We're still here, still fighting. Don't stop now." By noon, the Christian advance had pushed to the outskirts of the Ottoman camp, but Kara Mustafa's elite janissaries held the center. The Grand Vizier himself appeared on horseback, directing counterattacks, positioning reserves. He looked calm. Officers later recalled his face showed no fear, no panic, just intensity. The look of a man who understood he'd been catastrophically wrong, but refused to accept it until violence proved it undeniably. He committed his cavalry. Thousands of Sipahi horsemen, armored and professional, thundered toward the Christian center, hoping to break the German infantry before the Polish cavalry could deploy. It nearly worked. The German lines bent, buckled, men falling back in disorder. For a moment, the mathematics suggested Ottoman victory was still possible. Unlikely, but possible. Then Sobieski gave the signal. 3,000 hussars formed up on the Kahlenberg Ridge. Poland's elite cavalry, their backs crowned with wooden wings that created a distinctive sound when they rode. A hissing roar, psychological warfare made of feathers and wind. Behind them, 17,000 more cavalry. Light horse, armored lancers, German knights, Austrian cuirassiers, the largest concentrated cavalry force assembled in Europe in 200 years. Sobieski drew his saber, looked down the slope at the Ottoman camp, at Kara Mustafa's green pavilion visible in the distance. He'd studied the terrain all morning, measured the slope, calculated speed and impact, and the precise physics of mass moving downhill. This wasn't heroism. This was gravity weaponized. He pointed his saber forward and said one word: charge. The earth didn't shake. That's dramatic language, inaccurate language. What happened was acoustic. The sound of 20,000 horses moving simultaneously creates a frequency that human bodies feel in their bones before ears process it. A subsonic wave of hoofbeats that vibrates through ground and air. Witnesses on Vienna's walls heard it 3 miles away, described it as thunder, as earthquake, as the sky tearing open. The cavalry descended in perfect formation, not a mob, wedge formation, lances extended. Cavalry doctrine executed with precision that comes from drilling and experience, and understanding that cavalry only works if it hits like a single fist, not scattered punches. They accelerated down the slope, gravity adding speed, momentum compounding. The Ottoman lines saw them coming. Had 30 seconds to prepare. Not enough. Nothing was enough. You can't brace for physics. The impact erased the Janissary formations. Didn't break them, erased them. Lances punched through armor like paper, horses trampled men into mud. The cavalry didn't stop, didn't engage, just rode through and over and past, heading for the camp's center. For the green pavilion, Kara Mustafa watched his army disintegrate in real time. Not retreat, disintegration. Units ceased existing as functional entities, became individual men running in random directions. Panic is contagious. Spreads at the speed of watching your formation disappear. Within minutes, the Ottoman camp transformed from organized military installation to chaos made of smoke and screaming, and men trying to escape in every direction simultaneously. The Grand Vizier tried rallying reserves, sent orders for counterattack. But orders require structure. Require men willing to stand and form ranks and believe that standing will accomplish something other than getting killed. His soldiers had watched mathematics. Watched 70,000 defeat 300,000 through terrain and timing and cavalry doctrine applied at the exact moment when it would cause maximum structural collapse. They ran. Kara Mustafa sat his horse outside his pavilion and watched Polish cavalry approaching. He could die here. Should die here. Die with his army, die with his certainty, die proving that Grand Viziers don't flee. But he fled. Not cowardice, something worse. Denial. Belief that if he survived, he could rebuild, could explain, could somehow transform defeat into delayed victory. He rode east with whatever cavalry still functioned, abandoning the camp, abandoning the siege works, abandoning 2 months of mathematics made flesh. Polish soldiers entered the Green Pavilion and found maps showing roads to Prague, found chests of gold meant for the Sultan, found correspondence planning Vienna's conversion to Ottoman administration, found complete confidence crystallized in paper and ink, found everything except the man who built all this. He was already miles away, riding toward Hungary, toward Belgrade, toward winter and consequences. Behind him, his army scattered like a broken mirror, 70,000 pieces reflecting nothing but mathematics that started wrong in spring and ended predictably in September. The Siege of Vienna ended not with Vienna's fall, but with certainty's collapse. The city held because Starhemberg calculated time and rationing and disease and survival with cold precision. The relief succeeded because Sobieski calculated terrain and momentum and surprise. The Ottomans failed because Kara Mustafa calculated only his own inevitability. Different mathematics, different results. December 25th, 1683. Belgrade, the tent, the cord. We return to where we began, but now we understand what the silk means. Kara Mustafa wrapped it around his hands, feeling its texture one final time. Ottoman craftsmanship. Perfect, even in execution. The irony wasn't lost on him. An empire that could weave silk this fine, that could organize 300,000 men across 1,000 miles, that could build roads and aqueducts and administrations spanning 3 continents couldn't adapt when certainty cracked. Or wouldn't. That was more accurate. He'd spent 3 months replaying September 12th in his mind, searching for the moment when mathematics turned against him. Was it the cavalry charge? No, that was symptom, not cause. Was it intelligence failure about the relief force size? Closer, but still wrong. Was it the decision to mine instead of assault? Getting warmer? The real moment was earlier. Spring, Istanbul. The moment he decided Vienna would fall because he needed it to fall. Because taking Vienna would restore Ottoman glory, would complete Suleiman's unfinished conquest, would write his name in histories beside the great sultans. The moment he confused wanting with having, everything after that was just mathematics working itself out. Slowly, bloodily, inevitably. The cord tightened around his throat, but we're not watching him die. We're watching an empire die in miniature. Because Kara Mustafa's failure wasn't personal, wasn't unique, was systemic. The Ottoman Empire in 1683 was an empire that had stopped questioning itself, stopped adapting, stopped allowing reality to contradict desire. When intelligence said the Christian powers wouldn't unite, it was true based on past patterns. For 100 years, European kingdoms had fought each other more than they fought the empire. But patterns change when existential fear overrides political calculation. Intelligence reported patterns. Kara Mustafa needed certainty. He got certainty. Wrong certainty. When officers suggested assault instead of mining, they were questioning strategy. The empire's military culture had become hierarchical to the point of rigidity. Grand viziers didn't accept suggestions, didn't admit doubt. The price of maintaining authority was rejecting input. The price of rejecting input was Vienna. When the siege extended from weeks into months, basic logistics should have forced recalculation. 300,000 men consume resources at catastrophic rates. But pulling back would mean admitting miscalculation. Admitting miscalculation would mean losing face. Losing face was worse than losing soldiers, until losing soldiers meant losing everything. This is how empires commit suicide. Not through single catastrophic decisions, but through accumulated refusal to see what's actually happening. Through treating certainty as virtue instead of liability. Through building systems where being right matters more than getting it right. In Vienna, the aftermath looked nothing like triumph. Starhemberg walked the ruins, counting costs. 4,000 defenders dead. 8,000 civilians dead from starvation, disease, Ottoman bombardment. Entire districts reduced to rubble. Churches collapsed, houses burned, the smell of death so thick it took weeks to dissipate. He'd calculated they could hold 60 days. They held 61. The margin was 1 day. 1 day between survival and collapse. 1 day between Europe continuing and Europe ending. Mathematics doesn't celebrate, just calculates next time's variables. Sobieski rode back to Poland. Not as conqueror, but as mathematician who understood how close the equation came to failing. If the Ottomans had assaulted in July instead of mining, if rain had come 1 week earlier and bogged the cavalry charge, if Kara Mustafa had positioned reserves differently, if. Victory wasn't inevitable, was barely possible. The difference between empire and extinction was terrain and timing and a grand vizier who couldn't admit uncertainty. For the Ottoman Empire, Vienna marked the high water mark, the furthest west the crescent banners would ever fly. After this, slow retreat. Not immediate collapse, not dramatic defeat. Just consistent, grinding loss of territory as European kingdoms learned that the empire could be beaten, that its mathematics were outdated, that its certainty was weakness pretending to be strength. Historians would write about Vienna as the battle that saved Europe, as Christianity defeating Islam, as West triumphant over East. All of it missing the point. Vienna was about mathematics, about 2 men calculating different problems. Starhemberg calculating survival, Kara Mustafa calculating glory. Survival requires accuracy. Glory requires belief. When mathematics fights belief, mathematics wins. Eventually, bloodily, inevitably, the silk cord finished its work. Kara Mustafa died without witnesses, without ceremony, without anything except recognition that he'd been wrong, and the empire couldn't forgive wrong. His body was buried quickly, quietly, location unmarked. Not punishment. Erasure. The empire pretending the mistake never happened, the campaign never failed, the certainty never cracked. But certainty had cracked. The crack was irreparable. Within decades, Ottoman armies would lose Hungary, Transylvania, territories held for generations. The empire would survive another 2 centuries but never recover the trajectory, never regain the inevitability. September 12th, 1683 was the moment when everyone understood the empire could be beaten. After that, it was just details. We began with a question. How does 300,000 become nothing? Now we have the answer. Through certainty. Through refusing to calculate what happens when you're wrong. Through building systems that reward confidence over accuracy. That punish doubt more than defeat. That confuse the map with the territory until the territory rises up and proves the map was fantasy all along. The silk cord is still there, preserved in some Ottoman archive or lost to time. Doesn't matter. The thread it represents, the line between empire and extinction, between certainty and mathematics, between what we want and what actually is, that thread runs through every civilization that ever believed its own inevitability. Vienna stands. The walls were rebuilt, stronger than before. But the real construction happened in September, when mathematics proved that wanting something, even wanting it with 300,000 men and absolute conviction, doesn't make it real. The Siege of Vienna wasn't about who won, it was about what won. Reality over desire, calculation over certainty, mathematics over faith. And mathematics, patient and precise and utterly indifferent to human pride, always wins eventually. The Ottomans lost 300,000 soldiers at Vienna. But you don't have to lose the next story. We're investigating more battles where mathematics defeated certainty, where empires chose their own destruction, where the maps showed victory but the territory said otherwise. Next time, we're examining a siege where the defenders had no food, no water, no hope, and still won by calculating what their enemies refused to see. If you want to understand how civilizations die from the inside, you know where to find us. This is Valor and Violence, where we don't tell you who won, we show you why they lost.